Welcome to the Jeremiah Patterson Show, and thank you for joining me today. For the past week, I've been working on something really special, and I've been curious about it for years actually, but I was finally able to set aside time to do this. It's about book bans and the rise of censorship in the United States. I'm going to be joined by a very special guest tonight, Anthony M., who is a public historian here on Substack and other social media platforms. You are going to want to see this. But before we get to that interview, we have to start here. This is in Wilmington, North Carolina. And post-Civil War, post-slavery, Wilmington was an example of what a real multiracial democracy could look like in the United States. It was the largest city in North Carolina, and majority of the residents who lived there were black, and successful at that. You had black doctors, you had black lawyers, highly affluent black business owners and educators. There were black police officers and firemen. Black people in Wilmington had built institutions like churches and schools. One of the few black-owned daily newspapers in the country at the time was owned by this man, Alexander Manley, who lived in Wilmington, North Carolina. His newspaper was called The Daily Record, and it was read by everyone in the town. You even had white business owners who were close with Manley because they needed to advertise their businesses in The Daily Record. The Daily Record was that big of a newspaper. It was that influential in the town, and it was owned by a black man. In terms of political power, black people were there as well. They were elected to local office and won elections for statewide positions as well. Wilmington was governed by a fusionist coalition which consisted of black Republicans and white populists. It was a remarkable multiracial alliance. 3 out of 10 members on the Wilmington City Council were black. Black magistrates and judicial officers were elected in the city and the county. More than 20 black men were serving in the North Carolina state legislature, and they also had sent one to Washington, D.C. So again, this is post-slavery, this is post-Civil War, and it's simply what you can expect of a multiracial democracy. Wilmington, North Carolina is an example of what that would look like if there was this homogenous, racial society where blacks and whites, they lived together. I mean, there were integrated neighborhoods in Wilmington decades before the Supreme Court, essentially just outlaws and declares segregation unconstitutional. But of course, that boom, that rise, that the influx of positivity and this infectious multiracial democracy and how beautiful it was, that was not conducive to white supremacist ideology. And the white supremacists in the state did not see this as just. They did not believe that this was right. It really infuriated them that black people were not only successful, but they were also integrated with white culture. And they were also elected to positions of power. And so the racist Southern Democrats, they refer to this as Negro Domination. And they were bound to do something about this. They were bound to do something about the fact that there was a black problem in the city. So they turned to Josephus Daniels. Here he is here on the screen. He was the editor of the Raleigh News and Observer, a white-controlled newspaper. And they basically used that newspaper to promote anti-black propaganda, which ran vitriolic headlines like this, quote, "No rape committed, but a lady badly frightened by a worthless Negro," end quote. In an editorial, Josephus Daniels had gotten an artist to basically draw up several cartoons of black caricatures attacking, petrified white people with words like Negro rule hanging over them. And these images were mendacious because remember, although black people held, elected political office and were successful in Wilmington and across the state, white people in power still outnumbered them by a quantifiable difference. I mean, there were hundreds of people that, the governor, for instance, of North Carolina had appointed. 8 of them were black. And, but even just 2 or 5 black people in positions of power was Negro rule. And so for white supremacist Democratic voters, they were going to believe anything, basically. And many of them, of course, were illiterate. So these images were made in such a way to stir up such a reaction, to evoke such a feeling, a sense of rage that somehow these black people had gotten a little too ahead of themselves and white men were being replaced. In 1897, Rebecca Latimer Felton, a virulent, unabashed white supremacist, gave a speech before the Georgia State Agricultural Society, in which she advocated for the number of lynchings of black people to increase in order to protect rural white men. She said, quote, "If it takes lynching to protect woman's dearest possessions from drunken, ravening human beast, then I say lynch 1,000 a week." End quote. Of course, this statement wasn't just rhetorical. It was a deliberate incitement to racial violence. I mean, Felton used the myth of the black male rapists as a justification for lynching, feeding into one of the most destructive lies of the Reconstruction era, of the Jim Crow era. In her words at the time, when hundreds of black people in this country were being lynched across the South, often under the false pretense for trivial accusations, for just outright false accusations. And her speech was widely published and praised by segregationists, further fueling this racist violence and tensions between white Democrats and the black population in Wilmington, because this lie was starting to echo. And so Alex Manly decided that he would write a rebuttal. As dangerous as it was, he was going to debunk everything that she said. And so in his newspaper, the Daily Record, he wrote his rebuttal. Quote, "Miss Felton, like many other so-called Christians, loses sight of the basic principle of the religion of Christ in her plea for one class of people as against another. The editors pour forth volumes of aspersions against all Negroes because of the few who may be guilty. If the papers and speakers of the other race would condemn the commission of the crime because it is a crime, and not to try to make it appear that the Negroes were the only criminals, they would find their strongest allies in the intelligent Negroes themselves. And together the whites and blacks would root the evil out of both races. Every Negro lynched is a so-called big, burly black brute, when in fact, many of those who have been dealt with had white men for their fathers, and were not only black and burly, were not only not black and burly, but were sufficiently attractive for white girls of culture and refinement to fall in love with them, as is very well known to all. Mrs. Felton must begin at the fountainhead if she wishes to purify the stream. Teach your men purity. Let virtue be something more than an excuse for them to intimidate and torture a helpless people. Tell your men that it is no worse for a black man to be intimate with a white woman than for the white man to be intimate with a colored woman. You set yourselves down as a lot of carping hypocrites. In fact, you cry aloud for the virtue of your woman while you seek to destroy the morality of ours. Don't ever think that your woman will remain pure while you are debauching ours. You sow the seed, the harvest will come in due time." End quote. So again, this is Alexander Manly here responding in his newspaper, the Daily Record, in a blistering editorial, just completely eviscerating what Rebecca Felton said in her racist speech. He's basically saying, hey, you accuse us of the rape when in fact you are disregarding the fact that for decades, consistent throughout slavery, white men were the perpetrators of raping black women. You forget that. And so it is just a powerful, powerful condemnation of everything that Rebecca Felton had said. And not only was he saying that your men, that white men were rapists in regard to attacking and assaulting black women for decades and throughout slavery, but he also was effectively endorsing interracial relationships decades before Loving versus Virginia, when we got this Supreme Court case that effectively legalized interracial marriage. And that editorial by Manley came out at a time when the white supremacists in Wilmington, North Carolina had been planning an insurrection. They wanted to overthrow the government. And they wanted to rid Wilmington of its Negro domination. And so that editorial by Manley was used as a justification. See, they're getting too comfortable. How dare they disparage us like this? So this was in August of 1898. The elections for the city were 5 months away. And one reporter who visited the city said instead of preparing for an election, it looked like the city, quote, might have been preparing for a siege. On October 20th, just weeks before the election at a rally in Fayetteville, Senator Ben Tillman from South Carolina, known as Pitchfork Ben, boasted to a crowd of 8,000 white people that South Carolina had already dealt with its Negro issue. We've already dealt with our Negro problem. We've crushed any talk about black civil rights. That doesn't exist in South Carolina. And he also said that he wondered why North Carolinians hadn't killed Alex Manley yet for his disparaging editorial, why they hadn't gotten rid of him. He was also accompanied by a group of armed South Carolinian vigilantes known as the Red Shirts, who were notorious for violence and viewed as a terrorist arm of the Democratic Party. And by late October, the supremacist movement was growing. Alfred Moore Waddell, a Wilmington attorney and former congressman, spoke at Thalian Hall and spoke before a crowd of racist whites who were voracious for violence and said that, are we willing to surrender our liberty to, quote, a ragged rabble of Negroes led by a handful of white cowards? He then called on them to defend their freedom, even if it meant that they had to resort to violence. They continued stockpiling weapons, building a large enough arsenal to kill as many black people in Wilmington as possible. That's what they truly desired, not only to rid the city of its elected black representation, but also to purify it, to return it to its rightful white majority. And so when Election Day came around, Wilmington Democrats had armed white men outside of polling places to intimidate black voters, and they interfered with the election by stuffing the ballots and removing any votes for Republicans or black city officials. And the Democrats ended up winning by a majority, because of course it was rigged. But that wasn't enough for them. They were not done yet. A group called the Secret Nine called for a meeting for all white men to meet at the courthouse in Wilmington for a meeting. And they wrote a new Declaration of Independence for the city. They planned to hand over black people's jobs to whites, shut down the vile and slanderous Daily Record, as they called it, run by Alex Manley, and also to not only banish him from the city, but also the mayor and the police chief. 450 white men signed that petition. That was then presented to the black leadership of Wilmington, in which they were given an ultimatum. And even though they had met the deadline and returned a response, still the white militia acted. Quote, at 8 o'clock a.m., 2 days later, about 500 white men assembled at the armory of the Wilmington Light Infantry, and after several others declined, Waddell took on the task of leading them to the Daily Record office in Free Love Hall, 4 blocks south of 7th Street, between Nunn and Church Streets. The crowd swelled to perhaps 2,000 as they moved across town. Manley, in the meantime, had fled the city, as had numerous other black people, in expectation of violence. The mob invaded the building, a fire broke out, and the top floor of the building was consumed. The crowd posed for photographs in front of the burned-out frame. Within hours, violence had spread to other parts of the city. Silas P. Wright, their white Republican mayor, resigned under pressure, as did members of the city council and other officers, both black and white. Waddell then took office as mayor. The revolt had the support of as many of the most powerful men in the city. George Runtree, an attorney and advisor to the coup leaders, in 1899 served as chairman of the state legislative committee of constitutional reform that drafted and sponsored the so-called grandfather clause, providing that male citizens could vote if they could read and write or if their grandfather voted, thereby denying most blacks the franchise. End quote. You can see this harrowing image of the white supremacists in this photo smiling, gleeful about the fact that they had just burned down the Daily Record, owned by Alexander Manly. Ultimately, many black residents were killed, and they left the city, had their homes set on fire, communities destroyed, and the white supremacists of Wilmington got their way. The Daily Record was gone. It was burned down. This was an example of what a multiracial democracy could be, of what a multiracial democracy could consist of white people and black people getting along, living together, integrated in society. And a group of white supremacists, a large group of them, said, hell no, we are not going to allow this to happen. We cannot allow black people to think that they somehow have a place in society, that they somehow are going to lead us in positions of power. This is a story that is not widely known. And it's a story for a long time that really has been covered up. I mean, American Experience, PBS, did an incredible documentary on this story, better than I can tell it. But this is a story that is not widely known. In fact, it is a very obscure story in history, even in local North Carolina history. But it's a story that should be taught. It also is a story, though, that is told in a different way depending on who you ask. John Roy Lynch was born into slavery himself, but at the age of 24, he was elected to the Mississippi House of Representatives, becoming the Speaker of the House, the youngest to ever hold that position at the time. And he was a staunch advocate of civil rights, equal education, but also the preservation of black history. And for years, he wrote about this white supremacist myth that existed that portrayed black people as violent, destructive, and that the black top politicians were ignorant and corrupt. He said, no. Reconstruction wasn't a failure. It was actually a period of tremendous black political progress, like we saw in places of Wilmington. It was a tremendous period of black political progress and also interracial democracy that was violently overthrown. In his book, In the Facts of Reconstruction, he said, quote, "The efforts to make it appear that the Reconstruction measures of Congress were unwise, unjust, and unnecessary, and that the results thereof were disastrous, is a slander upon the memory of the patriotic men who enacted those measures, and a libel upon the intelligence of the American people. Very much, of course, has been written and published about Reconstruction, but most of it is superficial and unreliable. And besides, nearly all of it has been written in such a style and tone to make the alleged facts and related harmonize with what was believed to be demanded by public sentiment." End quote. So again, this is Mr. Lynch here, who went on to, serve an elected office, saying, hey, let's not rewrite black history. Let's tell the truth. Let's tell it like it is. There were horrors. There were atrocities. No black politicians were not corrupt. No black politicians were not ignorant. That is not why Reconstruction ended. It is because white supremacy was such a poison. It was such an infection in this country that they quite literally went to a city like Wilmington, North Carolina, an example, a beacon of multiracial democracy, and burned it. Banished black officials. Reconstruction was not a failure. And so we face this moment today where we are also in another moment of revisionist history, where we are facing modern day book bans across the country, a large amount of book bans. I mean, PEN America has found that more than 10,000 book bans have occurred in the 2023 to 2024 school year, more than doubled the book bans in the prior year. Think about book bans for a second. Why would you want to ban books? So you don't have a collective educated population, right? So that no one in society can counter what's going on. And it's specifically beneficial to have book bans if you're in an authoritarian government, because then you get something that's a reiteration of Nazi Germany, when they were willfully and jubilantly burning books. Because in an authoritarian country, right, education, being all-knowing, or just, being aware is dangerous, because you're less likely to obey. You're less likely to question. You're less likely to think. And so we are seeing a large amount of book bans happen right now, a gargantuan number of them. The United States Department of Education, under this president, under this authoritarian administration, has ended, quote, the hoax investigations into book bans. Like it's a hoax when it's actually happening. More so in Republican states. I mean, it's getting to the point where we now have to watch local library elections to see who's going to win in the local library election, because it's that concerning. You literally have people that are anti-books running to lead libraries. Think about how terrifying that is. I mean, the United States Supreme Court has just ruled that schools must let kids opt out of LGBTQ plus book readings, which you may just think it's just going to apply to that, but no. When it comes to school boards who are terrified or who do not want to confront conservative parents, they're going to start banning other books. Like, per se, stories about Wilmington, North Carolina. That insurrection that transpired, that overthrew a multiracial, thriving democracy. We are seeing a rise in censorship right now in the United States, a rise in book bans. There is a new version of TikTok that's going to be launching soon. It's going to be called M2, and it's going to be a US only version of the app. US only version. Only you'll be able to see what's happening here. Not in other parts of the world, only what's happening here. Of course, it's going to be heavily controlled. And I mean, really think about that, because TikTok has been used as essentially a platform, a tool for Gen Z, and also, effectively, if you're community organizing, it has been used as a tool to disseminate information, to make sense of things, to have an understanding of what's going on in the outside world that's not necessarily portrayed or told in mainstream media. It is a way to counter what the government is telling us effectively. That's what TikTok does. It's not just an app for dancing. It is so much more than that. Think about how dangerous that's going to be. We now have to contend with the fact that if you disagree with this president, if you disagree with anything that this administration says or does, you're on the chopping block in terms of your citizenship. ICE may come get you. The feds may come pick you up. With the rise of censorship and with the rise of book bans, what we are seeing is a concerning grasp on attacking institutions and attacking universities that provide thinking, that provide critical analysis. And that is extremely dangerous. And so when you consider stories like Wilmington, North Carolina, and the effort to now have revisionist history, stories like that would be forgotten. Because if you can make people forget stories like that, if you can wash those stories away, you can just do whatever. Because history is irrelevant. It's not applicable anymore. The danger of erasing history is irrevocable harm. And I'm not sure that people understand how grave a threat that is. And so my guest tonight is historian Anthony M. He is incredibly more experienced in making sense of this than I am, and he offers an invaluable perspective on history and where we stand today. He joins me next. Every day we're bombarded with headlines, loud, confusing, and sometimes designed to distract. But behind those headlines is a truth worth fighting for. I'm Jeremiah Patterson, host of The Jeremiah Patterson Show, and for the past 7 years, I've committed myself to uncovering what's real, what's right, and what's too often ignored. From breaking news and deep dive investigations to untold stories in history in today's fight for democracy, this work is my purpose. I don't just report the news, I care deeply about it and what it means. But to keep this work going and growing, I need your support. When you become a paid subscriber to the Jeremiah Patterson Show on Substack, you're not just backing independent journalism, you're fueling truth-telling in a time of disinformation. You're helping amplify voices the mainstream media too often leaves out, and you're joining a community that believes facts still matter. You'll get exclusive content, behind-the-scenes insight, and subscriber-only shows like the Unfiltered podcast and the Resistance one as well. But more than anything, you'll be part of a mission to inform, to expose, and to resist. I do this work because I love it, I do this work because it matters, and I do this work because it is essential. Because I believe journalism should serve people, not power, and because the truth still matters. So if my work has ever informed you, inspired you, or made you think, please consider becoming a paid subscriber today on Substack for just $7.99 a month or $75 a year. Now back to the show. Joining me now for the interview is Anthony M. He is a public historian. Anthony, thank you so much for making the time to come on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeremiah. It's always a pleasure, and I enjoy your work. So thank you for having me on.
Appreciate it. I wanted to ask you here, when it comes to the current age in terms of what we're living in through this news cycle and everything, how's your mental health as a historian?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think whether you're a historian or not, seeing the things that we're seeing will definitely affect your mental health. So I think it's important that we consume everything in bite size. Don't consume everything all at once. Don't consume it all day because you'll definitely go crazy. As a historian, one of the things that really affects my mental health is how so many people are going along with it.
Mm.
Um, and it makes me wonder when I look at things that like happen in Germany with the rise of you know who. Um, I think that it was very easy for people to fall in line with what people did. Um, and it's interesting for people to say if I was in that situation, I would do X, Y, and Z. We're in that situation now, and a lot of people are falling in line with what's happening, whether it be the mass deportations, the alligator Alcatraz, all that stuff. People are just going along with it and agreeing with it. So, as far as my mental health goes, I like to consume these things in very small pieces because I don't want to go crazy.
I feel like that's a very powerful point that you raised there. You know, if you were alive during that time, basically it is whatever you're doing right now. What would you say to people who are, I guess, struggling right now in terms of understanding that a lot of what we've known from the past is happening again right now, either in a different reiteration with just different faces and different figures. What do you say to those people who are despondent that we're like reliving through the past?
Yeah, so people that you mean like people that don't agree that we are living or
Yeah,
we're living in modern
I
times. Okay,
guess, people who are like struggling to reconcile with the fact that, history in a sense is extremely relevant here.
right. I would say to them, I don't see how you can look at it any other way. I would
Hmm.
tell them to pick up a book, or if they can't read a book, read an article. There are tons of articles written by historians out there that show direct correlations between what is happening now and what happened then.
Hmm.
Um, if you're seeing what we're seeing, we all have the same set of eyes. Some of us wear glasses, contacts like I do, and some of us don't. Outside of that, we all can see with our minds, with our eyes, what's happening. It's the comprehension part
Hmm.
that really that a lot of people don't get. Like they don't comprehend, or they'll say like, I don't understand how liberals don't get it, or I don't understand how conservatives don't get it. But if we look at what's happening is inhumane, and we look at it through a lens of history, and we see what happened in the past, there's really no way that you can look at this, even from a human standpoint, and say this is good.
Hmm.
This is something that should happen at the degree that it's happening. So, history aside, looking at this from a human perspective, when you have a child that gets accosted by immigration officers and he urinates on himself because he's so scared, when you have parents getting ripped away from their children, when you have children that are on TikTok pleading with the president to send their family back because they're underage and they're the only ones that are in their home because everyone in their house got taken away. There's no way you can look at this and say this is good. So I would say to them, look at your humanity, question your humanity, question who you are as a human. If you can look at this and smile and go, good for them.
When it comes to, I guess the censorship that we are dealing with right now, and just, the massive book bans all across the country in Republican states and cities, when it comes to that, censoring certain history in, like in Arkansas, removing, the African American, studies course, what what is your point on that? Like, what is your take on that when it comes to the book bans and the danger of removing the history that, people should know?
Right. When it comes to removing specifically African American history from school, it's more than just the removal of the history. It's the removal of the people.
Hmm.
Now remember that there are people that were in the civil rights struggle that, marched on Selma that died less than a decade ago.
Yeah.
There are people in their 90s today, in their late 90s today, that are still alive. So what they are trying to do is they're trying to push an agenda of forgetting. They don't want us to know what their ancestors did. They don't want us to know that our ancestors existed. I recently did a video on Septima Clark. I did it on TikTok. She was the woman who was the mentor of Rosa Parks. She mentored Rosa Parks. She taught Rosa Parks everything that she knew.
Mm.
And a lot of people were saying, "Well, I had no idea who she was." And I feel like what they're doing is working in a sense because we live in such a fast cycle. Everything is fast now. You'll put this video out there, people will watch it. 20 minutes later, they'll forget it,
Yeah.
right? Social media is so fast. Everything is moving so fast that they're banking on us not ever seeing the information of our ancestors, what our ancestors went through, what their ancestors did to us, and us just moving on and going on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing until a generation goes by and we forget that it even happened. And I tell people all the time, people go, "Oh, there's no way that people can forget." People tell me there's no way people can forget the March on Selma. There's no way that people can forget the "I Had a Dream" speech. There's no way people can forget that, right? But all it takes is two generations, right? I know who my grandfather is. I don't know who my great grandfather is. I
Mm.
don't know, you know what I mean? Like I mean, it doesn't take very long before we can forget that these things happen. And it's important that we don't. And I'm really hopeful that in this new age of social media, where people are using social media to put out content similar to myself, where we talk about Black history and we talk about the history that engages us, that we could put it in the zeitgeist and people do not forget that we come not only that our ancestors fight, but they are our ancestors. We come from them. We live
Mhm.
through them. We are their message today when they're not here. So that's my opinion on that.
And I definitely do strongly agree with that. It only does take just, a short period of time for that history to be forgotten. I mean, I recently, well, I've always been into documentaries, but I recently started watching documentaries on, Hazel Scott, Woodard, Marian Anderson, some, historical figures in Black history. I wanted to ask you here, um, about the attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion that's been happening under this administration, sort of in an effort to degrade, the Black community as well as other minorities, that they are not welcome, that their history should not be taught because, it makes white people feel uncomfortable when it comes to, learning about the history of white supremacy and some of the atrocities that happened, like the Tulsa Race Massacre. I wanted to ask you, in regard to that movement that is happening right now, um, what do you make of it, and what hopes do you have that the pushback will be greater than what they're trying to succeed in?
Well, I think that they're succeeding. And it's going to take a lot of intentional work to bring it back. But when it comes to the idea of not teaching it because white people or whoever feels uncomfortable, our ancestors felt uncomfortable when it was done to them.
Hmm.
We feel uncomfortable living through it. We feel uncomfortable learning about it. You know what I mean? So whose comfort matters more?
Yeah.
That is always my rebuttal. The person who went through it or the person that has to hear about it. Just because you have to hear about something doesn't make you responsible for it, but you
Hmm.
should definitely know that it happened. And this is, getting back to the part of, they don't want us to know that any of this happened. For example, if I knew that there was a leaking gas line underneath my house, but it never did anything, and I sold my house, would it be the responsibility of me to tell the next buyer that it's there just in case? It would be my responsibility to do that. So, what I'm saying is knowing about something doesn't necessarily make you responsible for it, but you should definitely know something about it in order so that if things do happen in the future, you can remedy those and you can get ahead of those. So, the second part of your question, what was that again? I'm sorry. You asked me about
About your hope for the future in terms of them trying to succeed with this and continue it.
yeah. So, I hate to be doom and gloom. Again, I try to look at the positive in a lot of things, but DEI, as we know it or as we knew it, honestly, I believe that a lot of it is gone. There are some companies that push back against it. But I really had to ask myself when I saw all these companies that were getting rid of it so fast, I had to ask myself how many of them actually wanted it to begin with.
Yeah.
I don't think that a lot of companies really wanted to push DEI. It came out of what happened in 2020 with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. And people were really having a reckoning of not only themselves but their coworkers. I know so and so is definitely qualified to do this job. Why can't he have this opportunity? It all comes down to the color of someone's skin. Um, and honestly, I think in the mind of a racist, when you did ask me about, what my overall thoughts were of DEI, in the mind of a racist, there's no job that a Black person can do that a white person can't do better.
Mm, hmm.
So the way I see it is any job that a Black person has, any job that a minority has, any job that a woman has, they're going to look at that person and go, they're a DEI hire.
Hmm.
But the thing is, I don't think a lot of Americans even know what DEI means. And a lot of people use it as a code word for the N word.
Yeah,
They do, because I saw the mayor of Baltimore when the bridge collapsed, people were telling him that he's a DEI hire. And I'm thinking to myself, what are you talking about? That's not how elections work. His constituents voted him in that office. He's not chosen to be
exactly.
he doesn't go through an interview process. He campaigns and people vote, and people voted to put him in office. So yeah, that's my overall view on what's happening with DEI, and I don't think it will come back in a way that we recognize it, because it's going to have to be very covert and very sneaky, because once the right wing gets wind of anything like it, they're going to run a campaign to shut it down again.
Yeah. I mean, because we are seeing, consistent and incessant attacks on higher education, on, historically black colleges and universities. Um, I wanted to ask you here lastly, this is sort of, I guess, like an ominous question. Um, what is your I guess your prediction of the future in terms if we continue seeing history censored and book bans elevate, what is your prediction of the future and the danger that that poses to our future children, to the next generation who may be completely blinded to history?
Um, so I have a son. My son is black. Um, and something that I consistently think about, what is the history going to look like when he goes to school? He's 4, so he's going to school next month. He starts school next month. But what is history going to look like for him? And I think that not everyone has a father at home that is a historian that could teach them these things.
Hmm.
So history is going to be very depending on where you live. Depending on where you live, you're going to get a different version of history. I know where I live in the South, people try to hide it where I live. I know, if you go down to like where you are, there's a lot more emphasis on Black history there,
Hmm.
because of where it is. Um, I know that where I live currently, there's a push to teach a lot of Confederate history. When you think about it, the where I live in South Carolina, the upstate, there weren't a lot of Confederates here. This is mainly a poor agricultural area. So the way I think about it is like something's gonna have to give. I honestly like either people are gonna have to, get their information about Black history from social media. My concern is the amount of fake misinformation that's out there. I heard a content creator recently say that she doesn't care about Emmett Till. I've heard
Yeah,
that.
that was
I
insane.
yeah, I saw that. I seen like a couple years ago where somebody made a whole thing about Martin Luther King being sexual abuser or something like that. So that's one of my concerns, because there is a shift where people are trying to turn our civil rights icons, demonize them.
Hmm.
Um, but I think that a lot of that stuff starts at home, and we have to teach our children media literacy, to ask questions like, basically who, what, when, where, why. What does a person gain by saying this information? What agenda are they trying to push? Uh, there has to be a level of media literacy that's learned in order to combat the misinformation that's out there. And then also, we have to reinforce the correct information so that our children, uh, learn these things. And also, I think that a lot of people, we need to look at Black history where we are, right? It's wonderful to talk about Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, uh, people like that. But Black history is more than those people. And
Yeah.
if you look at, like, for example, where we live, there's tons of Black history here,
Yeah.
and we have to make Black history more relevant to the next generation. Because it's cool to talk about, Martin Luther King, who he was, in Atlanta, Malcolm X was in New York, but what about the South Carolinas? What about the
Yeah.
North Carolinas? For example, James Clyburn, the congressman, he's still alive, still serving in the Congress. He is a civil rights legend.
Mhm.
I believe he was part of the people that created the Congressional Black Caucus. He's still alive, 88 years old. Um, so we have to make Black history relevant, so that people realize that, hey, this is where I live. So hopefully that answered your question. I got long-winded there.
No, no, you're good. You're good. Okay, I know I said last question, but when it comes to history, I'm like all in. So I wanted to ask you here, when it comes to, just what you were saying there, how social media can be used to elevate history. Um, what is the downside in terms of, to your point about, the girl who was talking about Emmett Till, in a degrading way? What is the downside to not only the censoring of history, the rewriting of it, but also um, the lack of desire to want to know or to engage with the past, feeling like it's irrelevant? Because as someone who is a historian, I feel like that's extremely dangerous. Feeling like the past is not worth learning, or it's not applicable at all.
Right. I've had people tell me that history is boring, right? And that's because they don't know how to relate to it in they don't know how to relate to it within current events.
Yeah.
So I think that the people you have to create for the people that want what you're giving. The people that don't want to engage with history are never going to engage with history.
Mhm.
And you have to determine whether or not you want to make it your job to make them engage with history. Now, that's an uphill battle. Trying to get somebody to engage with something that happened 50 years ago, 60 years ago, when they have their phone in their hand and everything you say is uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh,
Uh-huh.
and they're ignoring you. Right.
Yeah.
So, do you really want to do that? So, the way I think about it is, listen, the people who want to learn are going to learn. Now, eventually, you might reach someone who is interested in history content that talks to that person or knows that person and says, hey, check this video out. You have to create for the audience that wants to consume what you do. You can't worry about the people who don't, because trying to reach them is honestly, it can be a lost cause and it can get very frustrating very fast.
Hmm.
So
Once again, my guest is Anthony M. He is a public historian. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time. This was an awesome discussion.
you're very welcome. Thank you so much, Jeremiah, and keep doing what you're doing. If everyone follow Jeremiah, subscribe. If this is on Substack, if this is on Facebook, follow him. Any platform that you're on, follow him. This is a wonderful young man who's been doing this for a very long time, and he is on his way to being very successful. So keep up the good work, man.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's very generous of you.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, thank you for watching this video here on the Jeremiah Patterson Show. I really hope that you enjoy this, and also be sure to comment, like, and subscribe. Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I love to read the comments of the supporters as well as first-time visitors as well. This was a special report that I've been wanting to do for years, so I'm super excited that it has finally come to fruition with an incredibly perspicacious guest here, Anthony M., who is a public historian. Please go check out his work. I've learned so much. He has a wide range of history that he covers on his show. So please go watch him and support him on his Substack as well as his other social media channels. But again, thank you for watching this video. Be sure to share it with your family and friends, because this is something that is a critical crisis right now in the United States. Censorship and book bans on the rise. I mean, just the fact that we're having to watch and be concerned about our local library elections and this anti-intellectualism movement that we're facing in the United States. The danger of us, pushing back from history, not wanting to view it as something that is, needing to be learned, as something that is applicable to current times. It's completely dangerous. So open a history book, please. Share this video with your family and friends. Engage with history because it is essential. It is important. It is vital that we continue to remember the past and to not fall into revisionist history tricks. So, I want you to share this video with as many people as possible. I want you to comment and support the Jeremiah Patterson Show. As always, you can follow us on Blue Sky and Substack at tjpsnews. You can shoot me an email, tjpsnews@gmail.com. You can support the Jeremiah Patterson Show, as this is independent journalism, by making a one-time donation to us on Cashapp, Venmo, or as well as PayPal at tjpsnews. Thank you all so much again for listening. As I always say, eyes open, heads up, stay focused, be the resistance.